This is The Difference Makers, a Paladin security podcast. Each week, we take you inside the world of security for a first-hand look at the inner workings of the industry. But it's about more than just protecting property and manning events. It's about going above and beyond to make the world a safer and friendlier place.
Welcome to The Difference Makers. I'm Christina Haydanis with Paladin Security. Steve Eely recently hung up his superintendent hat with the Vancouver Police Department after a 32-year career where he led over 400 sworn and civilian members for the VPD's Operations Division. His experience is vast, and he brings it to Paladin Security in the role of director. In today's episode, Steve explains everything you need to know about law enforcement, like what to expect, how to apply, and how the industry connects with security. So thanks so much for joining me, Steve. You're recently retired from the Vancouver Police Department after a 32-year career where you gained experience in all sorts of areas. What would you say you enjoyed the most about that part of your life?
Well, I guess I was fortunate to get on at a young age. I got on at 21, and I actively sought out what I considered some of the more challenging roles, and to get an opportunity to go to those roles. Like I got into ERT, for instance, at about 4.5 years, which at the time was pretty junior. So I was literally a 25-year-old guy, full-time member of the emergency response team. So I was literally tagged the pup for a while because I was the youngest guy on the unit. But to get that opportunity was pretty cool, and it actually segued into a pretty solid operational foundation. And I know it assisted with some promotions and other opportunities down the road. So that was one major thing that I thoroughly am appreciative of. And the other is just the friendships that you forge. I mean, there's really is something to, I guess, putting yourself in harm's way and standing shoulder to shoulder with the person beside you and being there for each other. And you can't describe it unless you've walked the shoes, I suspect. But I just very much treasure the friendships that I developed and the friendships that I still maintain, even though I left the VPD.
For sure. Well, your accomplishments with the VPD are endless. You led the response for the VPD for George Floyd's demonstrations, which were managed peacefully, assumed goal command on the response to the pandemic, implemented the VPD's drone program. That's just the tip of the iceberg out of everything that you've done. So what are you most proud of from your career?
Yeah, and I guess I would put a big caveat in there too, that these things are such team efforts and there are multiple layers of command and key roles. So I played a role in it for sure, but I would not want to underscore or devalue the roles other people played. It really was a team effort. But if you're asking what I value, I guess the most is I guess I'm proud that over a multi-decade career, I left that place in better operational shape by virtue of some of my efforts. I mean, I was lucky enough at about the 10-year mark to get involved with the immediate rapid deployment program. It was post-Columbine that there was a need to do things differently. There had to be a more exigent response to an active shooting where there's unfettered access to additional victims. And so that was the birth of immediate rapid deployment tactics. And I had a hand in bringing that to the VPD, had a hand in developing it, delivering it to cycle training over the years. And then fast forward many years later, I had all kinds of opportunity to work with James Flewelling and other key guys at the VPD to bring other systemic improvements like mass casualty training to the front lines and significantly improving the equipment for members on the front line, improvements to critical incident management programs. I was a nationally accredited critical incident commander, and I know I got to, I guess, work with other sort of talented individuals in that field and bring them along. And by the time I left, I know there had been huge systemic improvements, and the people that were brought up, they're super, super capable and competent. And it allows a person like me to step away and know that the shop is in very good hands.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I feel like I'm jumping way ahead on this one, but just since we're on that topic of, you were talking about the active deadly threats and all that type of thing, but now that you're on the security side, do you feel that the officers are trained enough to be able to help deal with something if it does happen before the police are able to arrive, or help assist, with maps or counts of people or anything like that? Like, do you think that they're trained well enough, or that it needs to go further to be more prepared?
I would say, I mean, it's a multifaceted answer. I would say yes and no.
Mm.
Um, there's a lot of similarities with regards to the Vancouver Police Department, for instance, and how Paladin selects and trains their members. I mean, if I could just talk about some of the similarities,
Mhm.
there are stringent multi-stage selection processes in both. We have high quality front end training.
Mhm.
There is ongoing training and development of our members. There's a wide range of lateral and vertical career opportunities. In both cases, there's a culture that is palpable. I mean, people truly care about each other, which is cool. And on both, you really need strong interpersonal and de-escalation skills. It's just critical to what both sort of streams do. There's a commitment to serving the public in both, and a bit of a selflessness in that duty. So both are admirable career paths. So a lot of similarities that maybe, I guess, prepare a Paladin member to step into harm's way and provide service. I guess there's a little bit of a difference, though, between the risk tolerance and the risk in fairness that a Paladin member should assume. If it starts getting to a certain point, they probably should step back and make a quick 911 call and get somebody with some better tools involved quickly. But I think that the Paladin members are very well trained, and they can bring significant value to, I guess, an active deadly threat event, for instance. I mean, if you think about the run, hide, fight message, I mean, I would say stick to that sort of as a easy to remember game plan, no matter what. But even with that in mind, if you're in a secure sort of op center, for instance, or a control room, and you have access to cameras and phone lines, I mean, you can do a lot of good things with that. You can identify a suspect, you can get video recording, you can describe the suspect, the weaponry, his direction of travel, you can prevent access to other victims if you have lock control. So there's a lot of things you can do. You can have the grab and go bags and provide that to police to get them quick access to an active shooting event, for instance. So it's a little bit about awareness, but it's also just about training. And I think I know that through the Paladin systems, there's over 100 courses that improve people's skills. So that's just one of them. I'm impressed with what I see.
Right. So going back to what you were just talking about and saying that, how many similarities there are between police and security. Is that part of the reason that you decided to make the move over to the security side after your retirement from the VPD?
At the end of the day, like I mean, it was a difficult thing a little bit to step away from VPD. It was my entire adult life from age 21 to 53. So it was my adult life. And I would have been comfortable. I know the chief wanted me to stay, and I was happy working for him. I have nothing but respect for the chief. But I guess at the end of the day, I was probably looking to maybe learn some new skills. So I think I was looking for a career opportunity that allowed me to bring some transferable skills, but also learn some new tricks too. And that's what I kind of found here. There are transferable pieces, and then there's a ton of new things where I've honestly had to humble myself appropriately and realize that I'm the new guy and I've got so much to learn, and I'm still learning. There's been a lot of people that have been very, very kind and just taken the time to explain things to me on different processes financially and administratively, and even how to deal with clients and contracts. And it's a lot of new stuff. So I was looking, I guess part one was transferable skills, the ability to learn new skills, but also a culture and a climate that I actually wanted to be a part of. And I was lucky because oddly enough, I used to work security 1988 to 89 when I was in university. And I worked with a guy named Sean Kelly, who's a director with Paladin now. He became a lifelong friend. We've been friends ever since. And he spoke super highly of the leadership at Paladin and couldn't say enough about him. And it was a chance introduction that Sean introduced me to Chad Callick, Shane Wright, and ultimately Ashley Cooper. And I was just super impressed. Like, those guys care about what they do. They care about people, and they were very cool about welcoming me on board. So I'm very appreciative.
Oh, that's great. So now this podcast I wanted to dedicate to law enforcement, since you have so much experience in it, and how people could get into policing or how they can get into law enforcement. But law enforcement is a bigger umbrella than people may think it is. So it's not just policing. What else could be involved in law enforcement?
Yeah, so maybe it's a two-part question. If I could take the first part,
Sure.
how can people get into policing? So I am glad you asked that question. I know a lot of Paladin members would like to develop and ultimately pursue a career in law enforcement. So it was pretty cool that Ashley Cooper, Chad Calick, Shane Wright, Diana Trassolini, and a lot of good people from People and Culture, they're taking steps to try and help members get there. Specifically, we're developing a program called From Paladin to Policing, and it's a multi-module training initiative that will identify the specific hurdles you need to clear, and it'll help people actually be prepared to succeed in reaching their law enforcement career goals. And I think it's a good opportunity to help people get there because you're applying for a policing role. They're multi-stage processes, and if you can break down each stage, realize what the requirements are, what you can do to improve your chances, and I think it's just smart to do that. So that's some things that people could tangibly do within Paladin to try and improve their chances. Look for that program, get involved, and then if you're asking, what are the sort of the different facets of law enforcement? Yeah, there really are, I guess, within policing, three primary streams. There's operational, there's investigative, and there's administrative. So by design, when members, I guess, come on to policing, they're obviously quite green. The expectation is that they do the first 3 to 5 years in patrol frontline operations, where you're hopefully going to develop a solid foundation and get some exposure to all three streams. And from there, you can specialize, apply for lateral transfers, where you can become a bit of a subject matter expert in a wide variety of disciplines. And again, that can be operational, i.e. pursue the emergency response team. It can be investigative, where you seek out general investigation, or it could be major crime, it could be gang crime, it could be a lot of things. And then administrative, you've got things like training, recruiting, human resources, you name it. So it's really quite cool that, especially in a large department where you have lots of variety, you can literally, I guess, change your position every 2 to 5 years, have vastly different experiences, but still stay under the same employer umbrella, because typically in life, if you really want a very different job, you have to leave your job and go do something different. Well, at least in a big department with multiple streams, there's all kinds of options to keep it fresh, keep it exciting, and to actually broaden your own horizons and abilities too. So
Yeah,
it's pretty.
that is very cool. So when you do, tell me a little bit about the steps involved. I know it's probably changed throughout the years, but the basic steps involved. If someone said, I want to apply to become a police officer, they obviously have to submit an application, but like what kind of happens between the moment they would decide to apply and then if they end up getting I don't want to say hired, because I don't even really know. Do they have to do the training first before they get hired, or how does that really work?
So please forgive me if I'm missing a certain step or two here, because I'm going from memory right now. But I would say definitely get on the website of whatever agency you want to apply for, because the process it varies slightly by agency, is what I would say. But typically, at least in Western Canada, the way it typically works is like in Vancouver, for instance, you have to attend an information session, just so you are aware of the process and what you're actually committing to if you go down the road. And then typically, and again, I'm going from memory here, but there's a written test that needs to be, I guess, completed, and there are specific mark thresholds depending on what you're applying for. If it's a full serving member, for instance, I think it's a minimum of 60% on this test, and it might be 50% if you're going for community safety, traffic enforcement, or jail. So there's varying scales on that. And if you get through that, there's I believe a physical. It's the POPAD and the beep test. There's a series of interviews that will happen with, I guess, as a starting point with a recruiting detective, but then you get through that. You'd be following up later with a sergeant as well. But at the end of the program, there's a very detailed background check where they're going to look into your what you've completed on the application, and it's very detailed, multi-page. But they're going to want to drill down on some of the items that might cause people concern. So there is a polygraph in Vancouver, for instance. So that's kind of the general process, and I might be out of order on some of this tests, but that's the general process. And there's obviously a physical where you have to get your eyes, ears, and everything else tested just to make sure you're physically sound. That's the process in Vancouver, for instance. There are some agencies that will throw in a psychological assessment as well. And that's just a mental health professional who will also review some of the material and drill down on a few key points. That's the only real difference between agencies locally. In Ontario, locally, when you go through that process, if you get through the process and you're offered the job, you're sworn in, and then you would attend the police academy. You would do a block at the academy. You would do a block on the road with a field trainer, block 2, and then you'd go back to the academy for block 3 for more instruction, and then you would graduate, then be deployed on the road, and then in incremental fashion. So that's the process locally. And then there's a slight difference in some of the Ontario agencies, from what I understand, in that members will have to basically put themselves through a policing course, if you will. They'll take that mark, then apply it to a department and try and get hired that way. But some of the front end training is done by the individual member on their own dime before they even apply. And then RCMP has a slightly different process in that you apply through them, and all their training is centralized out of Depot in Regina. Right. So the big message is they're relatively consistent, but I would very much encourage people to look into the specific stages for the department you're interested in joining, because they do vary a little bit.
For sure. And Paladin does have quite a bit of information on the blog just about how, joining different police departments. But how roughly would you say, how long would it, does the process take? Does it take a few months, or is it a few weeks? I know it probably ranges for each agency, or if you're with the RCMP or anything like that.
Yeah, it really does vary by agency and moment in time. Like if there's I guess not a huge demand for new members, then you might be in a 1 to 2 year process, quite honestly. If there's a current demand and a person is swimming through each stage and gate quickly, then it could be a 4 to 6 month process. So it really does vary. I think something to be aware of, though, I guess there is some pressure for police departments to be representative of the communities they serve. So sometimes candidates are prioritized based on that need as well. So that's probably the best way to say that.
Okay. So how much does having experience in security, help with becoming a police officer? Does it make a difference? Does it not? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm basically, having talked with different folks in the recruiting field, I'll say first, Paladin has an excellent reputation. Mm-hmm. The training and the processes that people are trained in and subscribed to here, it's recognized in the law enforcement community. So I think people that are working for Paladin are doing themselves a favor if they're interested in getting there. Some of the things that prepare them for the career in policing are some of the parallels I talked about earlier, like some of the front end training, the ongoing training, the development, the discipline, the report writing, the de-escalation skills, dealing with people from different walks of life and treating them with respect. There's some professionalism and required and some dignity that people need to be afforded. So that all very much translates into public service and policing as well. So to learn those sort of, skills very much is a good springboard into policing.
Definitely. Now, I guess, I don't know, hopefully you can answer this, but I'm just wondering, what do you think is one of the biggest things that people might not realize when they're looking to join the police department or a force or an agency?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I mean, I think some people, I'll say two things on this front. One is shift work. People don't fully appreciate what it's like to work night shifts and maybe get an hour of sleep and go to court, and then maybe be in court all day and then have to go back to an afternoon or night shift. And obviously exceptions can be made if people are really ready to drop, but you are running tired with some regularity when you're working shift work, and it's hard on families sometimes. Like it's not easy if you have a spouse who really would like you to be working day shift only and home at night to assist with family stuff. You really need a very supportive spouse and somebody with some flexibility and tolerance too, because even beyond regular shifting, once you start getting into specialty spots like ERT, for instance, you can get paged because there's a priority thing come up and you've got to go. It's not really optional. So you need to have backup plans in place, like childcare. You need an understanding spouse and some recognition that you might not be there for all the birthdays and holidays. So just know that on the front end, so you can work on it and communicate with your spouse as well. The reality is, I mean, I talked about some of the parallels, but in policing, for instance, I think it's one of the more heavily regulated professions on the planet. There's a significant multi-tier selection process with polygraphs, serious background checks going in. There's significant front-end training. There's ongoing training. There are all kinds of measures on an officer's performance. They're subject to civil suit, criminal charges. Under the Police Act, they can be held accountable. Human rights legislation. The Office of the Police, under the Police Act, it would be Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner, but also the Independent Investigation Office, IIO, for more serious matters. So I don't know of another profession that has that many accountability measures, I guess, sort of focusing on the conduct of members, for instance, like doctors don't even have that kind of oversight, nor do lawyers, nor do anybody.
Yeah.
So I would say be aware of that if you're going into policing. Conduct yourself professionally always, just like you would in anything, but know that there will be a lens turned to your actions. So I have nothing but time and respect for people who step into the shoes and try and serve the public that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just want to take a right-hand turn quick.
Sure.
Over your years, I don't know how it was when you first started, but are you seeing more women get into policing and even different, ethnicities? Like, is that something that you have seen a change over the last few years?
Oh, huge change. Yeah. When I came on 32 years ago, it was, there were certainly females and different ethnicities involved with the force, but it was predominantly a white male occupation. And I would say over the years it has continually evolved. And current day, like in the large departments especially, you see a ton of a lot more gender equity, a lot more ethnic diversity. And I would say that's an excellent thing. I mean, at the end, Robert Peel's principles, I mean, the police are the police of the public and the public of the police. I mean, you have to be a representative of the community you serve just for legitimacy purposes. And that's been happening significantly. And it's not a bad thing that is occurring. It gives people hope, opportunity. The community, even if they're not involved in policing, they realize that their interests are represented and considered and understood. That's a good thing. And I would say a lot of people, like across genders and ethnic boundaries, who may not have had an opportunity to step into leadership positions are certainly getting that now. And it only adds to the richness and the diversity within the department. And again, how they represent the community. So it certainly has evolved, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Before I wrap it up, do you have anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't touch on?
No, I guess what I would say too is policing is such a rewarding career. I fully endorse it. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It's not an easy career sometimes. There are certain things where you're physically, I guess, in harm's way. So hopefully people come out physically intact at the end. But one thing that is something to pay attention to, not just in policing, but in any walk of life, take care of your mental health. Even when I started, like 3+ decades ago, there was support in place, but I have to say people did not reach out for it that often. It just wasn't or culturally acceptable maybe, but that has changed so much over the years. There's so much support there, and an acknowledgement at so many levels that people should take advantage of the supports that are out there. And I would say, please, like anybody who is struggling mentally, reach out, get support, and not just for yourself, but your family too, because it can be a difficult job on the individual, but it's hard on the families too, like on the spouses and the children. Like, so if they need support too, please get them the help too, because it's generally available to them. So just take care of yourself physically and mentally, and recognize it's a team game. So if you see a friend or a partner struggling, step in and do what you can to help them.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it's even pertains to security, I would say, because some of the situations that people have to deal with and respond to, it might be traumatizing, and then if you have no one to talk to about it, it can just kind of spiral and lead to like you said, mentally being needing some assistance. So that's such a good point to bring up as well. So thank you so much, Steve, for joining me. It was really great to talk to you and learn a little bit more about law enforcement and your career and how to get into law enforcement for those interested. So thank you so much for all your tips and insight.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to The Difference Makers, and be sure to check out new episodes on the first Tuesday of every month.